Chapter 13, Delivering Your Speech. Let's now get to the nitty-gritty of how you will actually give your speech, not just for this course, but any time that you are asked to make a presentation at work, in your church, in your group of friends. Let's learn how to do that. There is power in speech delivery, so it's important that you are aware of what you can do as you deliver your speech. Listeners expect effective delivery. Listeners these days don't have time to sit before speeches or presentations that aren't worth their hearing, and not just for the information, but for the delivery. It should be a platform conversation with good eye contact and other things that are adapted. Audience centered delivery, making sure that the purpose of your delivery is to the audience. You should be aware that listeners, that your audience will make emotional connections with you through your delivery. So, not just your words, but the way you deliver will be very important. And listeners will believe what they see. There's several methods of delivery, and you'll need to spend time in your text reviewing those very specifically, but I want to go over some of the things today. Manuscript speaking, obviously, is reading from a manuscript. It's rarely done well enough that it is interesting or inviting to an audience. It needs careful crafting, and there are some delivery tips that are listed in your book that you need to be aware of. There's also memorized speaking, and memorized speaking has some risks and some appropriate uses, but it often is very stiff and sometimes stale. Impromptu speaking is just that. It is spur of the moment, impromptu, speaking off the cuff. If this class were not online, we would do some impromptu speaking. Extemporaneous speaking is the kind of speaking that you want to do in most situations. It is well organized because you've done preparation, and it's well rehearsed because you've rehearsed, rehearsed, rehearsed. It will sound spontaneous, but it will be appropriately polished and worth hearing, and your audience will be engaged with you. How does your audience get engaged? How do you, as the speaker, engage your audience? One of the first ways is eye contact. You may have heard in years past of taking a speech course or being with someone when you were about to make a presentation who said, "Don't look into their eyes, look above their heads." People know when you're looking above their heads. They know when you're looking into their eyes. Remember that we said earlier that the eyes are the window of the soul. So you want to make sure that you're looking from your soul into their soul. Gestures are something that you need to be aware of and that you need to be careful of. There are cultural expectations in gestures. Be aware of your audience and if there are cultural differences. Make sure that you don't make inappropriate gestures. Maybe gestures that are appropriate here in America are not to some of other cultures to whom you are speaking. Make sure that you're aware that your gesture has a function, that you are doing it deliberately and there's a purpose, that you're not simply speaking with your hands and moving them just because you say, "I speak with my hands." Make your gestures deliberate and effective. And that takes us into movement. Make sure that it has purpose and that it's not distracting. Be aware of walking around. If you're moving too much, it can be distracting. If you're swaying, that might be distracting. Physical barriers often are things like a lectern or a podium. Make sure that you're comfortable there. Immediacy is your ability to feel close to your audience, to connect with them, to bring them into what you're saying. And then make sure that your transitions in your movement are appropriate and that they're purposeful. You next need to think about your posture. How are you standing? I would suggest that you put your weight on both feet, that you don't stand with your knees locked, because if you do, it might cut off your circulation and cause you to pass out. I experienced that in a classroom speech one time. It was not fun for the girl who passed out or for those of us who were watching and then trying to catch her before she hit the ground. Be aware of your posture. Put your weight on both feet, maybe one foot in front of the other, but not to the point that you are going to sway back and forth. Make sure that with your posture, you're standing up straight, that your manuscript or your notes will be high enough so that your eye contact and your voice goes out, that your voice is not going down to your chin because the podium is at an awkward place. Facial expressions are vitally important, not only in all of life, but in speech delivery as well. Some more characteristics of speech delivery and effective delivery are your vocal delivery. We've discussed some of these prior to this, but make sure that you're speaking to be understood, that your volume is enough to be heard, that you're not screaming, that you articulate your words, that your dialect is not so southern or so anything else that it's not understood. Make sure that you pronounce your words and that you speak with vocal variety. We talked about pitch and rate and pauses and silence. There's another challenge that comes along with speaking to an audience, and that is often using a microphone. I strongly suggest that if you have to use a microphone, that you make sure that you test it before it is time to speak. I love what your text said under using a microphone. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Is this on? These are not effective, attention-catching opening remarks. So make sure that you have done that testing prior to your audience coming in. There are 3 types of microphones that are listed in your text: lavalier, boom, and stationary. If you're using a microphone, please be aware of that. One of the things that you need to be cautious of are plosives, and those are things with P's that might boom through a microphone. And then be aware of your personal appearance. It is important that you are appropriately dressed for your delivery. Often, appropriateness is misunderstood through cultures, through generations. So get with whomever has asked you to speak and make sure that you are appropriately dressed. I would say to you personally that sleeveless is not appropriate for females when they are speaking in front of an audience. Make sure that you are modestly dressed and that your dress is not distracting. So make sure that your personal appearance is appropriate and appropriate to your audience. Things that you need to think about before you speak, and some of the things that we've discussed earlier, are diversity and delivery. So you want to avoid that ethnocentric mindset and consider using a less dramatic style if you're with high context listeners. Remember to think about culture. Consult with other speakers who've presented to your audience. So if you're asked to speak at some different organization, you might talk to people who've spoken to that organization before. Monitor your level of immediacy with your audience. Monitor your emotions and your expression of those things. Know the code. Here we discussed even a little bit earlier about gestures and are they appropriate to this audience. Prepare for working with a translator. If that is going to be part of what you are doing, please make sure that you have met with the translator. I think on these last two bullets, know the code, prepare for working with a translator, because I've done foreign mission trips, I'm aware that often the American code is different from the foreign code of the country in which I've visited. And the same thing in working with the translator, being prepared to pause to make sure that the translator is aware of your terminology as well. And then some final tips about rehearsing your speech. Give yourself enough time. In an 8-week course, there's not a great deal of time. So practice before you make your speaking notes. Make sure that you time your speech and that you prepare your speaking notes. Rehearse your speech standing up, not just lying on your bed with your notes or sitting in a chair. Rehearse it as you will be giving it. If you can, rehearse with an audience. And you might want to record your rehearsals before you are recording for purposes of this course. Rehearse using all of your presentation aids if you are using visual aids. Be realistic. Recreate as much as possible the speaking situation. And although for the purposes of this course, that situation will be extremely different, I ask that you try to rehearse as much as you can the way that you will be delivering your final presentation. And then practice, 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 rehearse, 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 all of these good delivery skills that we've discussed. For delivering your speech, make sure that you get plenty of rest the night before, that you review the suggestions that we've made throughout these different presentations about becoming a confident speaker. When you are presenting other than for this course, make sure that you arrive early for your speaking engagement. That gives you an opportunity to look at the venue, to look at the room, to understand what, where, all of those things about delivery that will help you. It may be that the person who invited you has described the situation, but it isn't maybe always as we see it in our mind's eye. And then when you are preparing to deliver your speech, visualize yourself succeeding. Sometimes there will be an opportunity for you to respond to questions at the end of your speech. Look at this slide and look at your text about how you might need to respond. One of the most important things is to be brief. And then to visualize and think about what questions might a person ask from this speech that I'm giving. The last bullet says indicate when the Q&A period is concluding. So you need to be able to wrap it up, to have some way to conclude your presentation so the audience is aware. Once again, I love the quote. I love William Shakespeare, who said, "Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue."